good morning, everybody, and welcome to yet again another episode of Biologyzing. I'm your host, Ichabod Slice, and today we are out here in a charming little town known as Ojai, California, Southern California, Ventura County. And I chose Ojai today because I remember growing up, a lot of friends and family talking about visiting here, is kind of like a little day vacation trip. Get out the hustle and bustle of the main city and go to a little nice charming town surrounded by nature where you can shop at the little charming boutique shops and buy little charming knickknacks that will end up sitting on your shelf for about 20 years before you sell it at your own yard sale. So the town of Ojai prides itself in being close to nature, and it actually does a lot to protect its trees around here because it likes having this, this kind of vibe, this kind of like natural mystique. A lot of what I like to call born again hippies will come out here and they want a piece of this stuff. And so they come out here to get immersed in it for a little bit, buy things at boutique shops. So originally this valley was controlled by indigenous Chumash. And then, privileged Europeans, particularly Spanish, came over here and decided they wanted the land for themselves and they used it for ranching. And then they got tired of it and then they sold it to a series of rich Caucasians who first found oil out here in this region, and then they tried extracting the oil, found out it was too hard, and since then the land has been sold and parceled out to a series of other rich aristocrats who wanted to make this area and keep it as beautiful as possible. And today I decided to kind of get a snapshot of one of the areas that is considered to be one of the more beautiful spots in this town, and basically see what it looks like today. But from a biologist or ecologist perspective and everything, because you can see around here it does look pretty lush. You got a nice canopy of large trees, pretty relatively thick mid-story with some open spaces, and then some relatively thick ground cover vegetation as well. So yeah, it does have a lot of habitat complexity, a lot of heterogeneity, creating all these spaces and areas where a variety of organisms use to their advantage. So that's the point of biologizing today, kind of get a snapshot of at least this point in time, what type of species exploit this area. So if I was to classify this area out here, this type of ecosystem, I would classify it as an oak forest, because by far the dominant trees out here are oak trees within the genus Quercus, and they're way too dense for it to be considered a woodland or a savanna. And the most prevalent oak tree out here is this. This is Quercus agrifolia, also known as the coast live oak. And this is actually one of my favorite trees, probably my favorite tree in Southern California, identified by these kind of cup-shaped leaves, very scabrous, waxy, hardy tree, one of my favorite trees. And this is a big one right here, and you can see how scraggly it looks. I like how scraggly it looks too. Kind of gives off a little bit of a spooky vibe, a spooky look. It's all like mangled and scraggly. Kind of reminds me of something like Tim Burton would draw or something like that. And the other co-dominant tree I'm seeing out here is this is western sycamore, Platanus racemosa, in the family Platanaceae, which is kind of an old lineage of trees. Fossils of members within the Platanaceae have been found dating back at least to the Cretaceous, I want to say. And they have this similar morphology to their leaves. And then you can see that it also grows in this kind of mangly type of fashion. This tree is actually found more so in wetter environments. I mean, right here it's kind of found in this little flood basin with that stream system going through. So it makes sense why it's found here. And you can see it's leaning over, and then you have these larger secondary stems kind of popping out from that, creating this really wide canopy. Yeah, this species is pretty cool. This family is pretty cool. There's only one genus in the family. And looking at this tree, I mean, you, the average person, might not think it, but looking at this tree, to me, it's kind of like looking at a horseshoe crab or something like that. It's just kind of like a stubborn lineage that has remained persistent throughout the millions and millions of years until today. Okay, so now let me advocate on why I personally feel why it's important to learn botany. If you look at the plants closer and kind of figure out exactly what they are, you can get a really good picture of the level of anthropogenic disturbance to an area. Because again, looking at this spot, it looks real nice, looks real lush. You see a lot of vegetation, but you look closer at this vegetation and you can get a much more refined sense of the overall habitat quality of this spot. So I'm over here at this little stream system, and it looks pretty nice. You know, it looks like it has good in-stream habitat complexity, as what us biologists would call it. You know, it's got a lot of crenulations within the stream bottom, i.e. those cobble and boulder. And as you move downstream in different parts of the stream, you know, you got sandy, muddy bottom mixed with a lot of coarse particulate organic matter, i.e. dead leaves, twigs, sticks, and even trash. And in and around this stream system, again, you can see that it's relatively lush. You know, you got a good assemblage of plant species here. However, if you were to look more closely to what these plant species are, you can kind of see the evidence of anthropogenic influence that has occurred out here. So one of those plants that I'm seeing that makes up a dominant covering most of the ground layer here is this one. So this is Vinca, and I think it's Vinca minor, but the common name of this is periwinkle, and it's in the Apocynaceae, which is the family of oleander and dogbane. And just like many of the current residents that live in Ojai, its ancestors were transplants from Europe. So this is a native to Europe, and it can be found all across Europe. And in many cases, especially here in California, this plant is considered invasive because it's well suited to the climate. It's well suited to the microclimate underneath the understory of all these oak trees. And it has very few competitors and very few herbivores that will eat this stuff. And on top of that, in many instances, I have observed native insect species pollinating this, you know, taking the nectar that this flower provides and in turn pollinating it, which aids in its proliferation and in turn helps it being a dominant plant out here. And just like Europeans, they have elbowed their way into the ecology of this area, becoming a dominant plant and outcompeting native plants, especially for a lot of the space in the understory out here. But yeah, Vinca minor. Okay, so right here we got an insect, a mating pair of individuals right here. It is the spring, so 'tis the season, the mating season. Anyway, so I think that these individuals are within the genus Symplecta in the family Limoniidae, which is a family of crane flies. True crane flies are in the family Typulidae, but this is in a different family. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of this family is the way adults hold their wings. I mean, you can see the female right there. That's the lighter individual, I'm sure. But if you look at the male, you see those wings are kind of more or less laid sheet-like along its back, whereas actual crane flies within the family Typulidae, oh, you can see that female, she's starting to fold her wings, also sheet-like on her back. But crane flies within the Typulidae, they don't hold their wings like that. They hold their wings like kind of just like spread out. So the larvae of this species are aquatic or semi-aquatic. They kind of live like, you know, around the muddy banks of streams, or their larvae will grow and develop and eat. You know, they're kind of eating like dead things, you know, decaying things that would decay on the banks. And this family is holometabolous, so they have a larval, pupal, and adult stage. And right now you're looking at these two individuals, obviously in their adult stage. So, you know, when insects have wings, they are adults and they won't continue to grow anymore. Their sole purpose is to feed and mate, which they're doing right now in order to get the next generation going. But as adults, they have a wide variety of food sources. You know, they will also eat dead decaying things, but they'll also eat, you know, living plant matter, and some species are even predatory. But yeah, Limoniidae symplecta, a native insect species using this habitat here. Oh, I just saw something really cool here. Let me see if I can catch it. Okay, I got it. Oh yeah, look at that. Okay, so what we got right here is an organism within the class Arachnida and the order Opiliones, which is the order of harvestmen, aka daddy longlegs. Yeah, that's right. Daddy longlegs are these things right here. They're opilionids. They're not the cellar spiders that everybody confuses to be daddy longlegs. And yes, these are not actual spiders. They're in a group of arachnids all to their own. And these things are very interesting, at least in my opinion. So right now, I kind of want to draw your attention to the second pair of legs right there. You can see that they're kind of like long and wispy and feeler-like. That's because that's exactly what they're used for. They're used as feelers. So they're kind of analogous to, you know, the antennae of insects and everything. And there are many arachnid groups that have evolved separately, you know, structures, whether they be leg structures or pedipalp structures that are used for as sensory structures. You know, sensory structures that would essentially do the same thing that antennae or other feelers that other organisms would have. Okay, nice close-up shot. You can see the on top of the head right there, you got the eyes, very simple eyes. And although they're called simple eyes, those are actually highly derived because when it comes to arthropod, the compound eye, eyes that are composed of many different eyes, that's actually the ancestral condition. Whereas these arachnids, they have simple eyes, which are derived. So you get a good shot of the pedipalps. Now, because these pedipalps look relatively large to the proportion of the body size, I am assuming that this is a male, although I could be wrong. I don't know too much about Opiliones. But then those other two kind of like, from this angle, lobe-looking structures that are moving up and down, those are the chelicerae, which are the classic mouth parts that all arachnids have, arachnids and horseshoe crabs. But yeah, the daddy long legs, Opiliones. How about that? Yeah, see there, you can see those second pair of legs doing its feeler thing. It's feeling around, basically acting like antennae. And this is just another example of how feeler-like structures have evolved within the arthropoda. So this vinca, although it's invasive, we can see that it does serve some sort of ecological function still. You know, it does provide, you know, ample foraging habitat and microhabitat, especially for invertebrates. And those invertebrates that we saw earlier were native invertebrates. And because of this species' tenacity and hardiness, it's probably here to stay. This is definitely part of the new modern ecology within a system like this. So this little plant right here is a native plant, native to California, within the genus Gallium in the family Rubiaceae. I can't tell what species this is right now, but there are many species of Gallium. Gallium is a very large genus, like I think well over 500 species. But yeah, like I said, it's a native plant, and it can easily be determined that it's Gallium because of these, like, I guess like somewhat like wheel-like rosettes of leaves that are evenly spaced out along the stalk, essentially. And this is an interesting plant because it does exhibit epizoochry. And if you don't know what epizoochry is, that is the strategy that many plants use to disperse their seeds. I mean, if you ever walk through a field of grass, especially a field of invasive grass like Bromus madritensis, you notice that the awns on their seeds get stuck in your clothes. And that is a tactic used by many plants to disperse themselves to new locations so they can propagate and proliferate there. But species like those grasses, you know, they have little barbs on their awns, which allows them to stick onto animal fur and, you know, socks and stuff like that. Whereas this species, their seeds, they have like little Velcro-like hooks and everything. And in my opinion, they're just as effective as those grass seeds in sticking to animals and being carried off, you know, to new locations. Yeah, gallium. Okay, sitting a little stream side, we have this right here, another native that is remaining persistent. This is Rubus ursinus, also known as the California blackberry, in the Rosaceae family. You can see right there, it's got those nice rose flowers with those sepals right there. They're kind of a diagnostic characteristic of members within the rose family. Yeah, unlike the blackberries that you might get at the supermarket, these berries are much smaller. However, in my opinion, I feel like they taste better. And you notice the leaf structure right here, it's got these 3 leaves because right next to this rubus, we got this right here. This is the infamous Toxicodendron diversoloba, aka the poison oak, with those urushiol oils that will get onto your skin, especially if you're allergic, and you know, will cause these nasty kind of weeping, oozing rashes, which is not fun. Easy to get rid of though if you have the right, you know, topical ointments and everything like that. But yeah, family Anacardiaceae, which is the family of poison oak and everything. But you can see right here, looking at this kind of like mini floodplain right here in this confined stream section, that, you know, you got a lot of plants that roughly look the same, but you got to look closer in order to know what actually you're walking through. And this is what I mean when it helps to know the plants, so you can kind of avoid those situations that you don't want to get yourself into. So now we are in a pretty heavily forested area, and you notice that there's a lot of sections where we have a lot of this leaf litter on the ground. And leaf litter is very important for forest ecosystems because piles of leaf litter within themselves are their own little ecosystems and everything. You know, there's a whole dynamic that occurs there, which involves the the transfer and cycling of nutrients within the overall ecosystem here. So you have these leaves that are these dead leaves that'll fall onto the ground, creating layer by layer. And the lower you go, the more they become decayed and degraded away and eaten by microorganisms such as bacteria and fungus and other detritivores, you know, worms and other invertebrates. Those refine those nutrients to make them available within the soil that can be taken up by the vegetation and all these trees and everything. So notice as peeling back this top layer, things get a little darker because it's more moist. So leaf litter basically is mulch, so it helps retain moisture underneath these layers. And you can see as I dig down more, the particle sizes get smaller and smaller because they are being eaten up and degraded away by bacteria and other microorganisms. Ooh, right here. So right here we have an insect that is kind of ubiquitous amongst many Californians. The common name of these things, they call them potato bugs. At least that's what I grew up knowing them as. But this is in the genus Ammopomatus. I don't know exactly what species it is. There are a number of different species, but it is in the family Stenopelmatidae. And you can see right there with its robust appendages, very buff looking appendages, perfect for pushing its way through the leaf litter. And these are omnivorous, so they will eat a number of different things. They'll eat, you know, tubers and root systems and everything, hence why they're called potato bugs. But they're also predatory too. They will eat other organisms within this leaf litter system, probably worms and other small things. Yeah, let me get it out. Okay, there we go. Now you get a shot of those menacing mandibles. And yes, they can bite, and they do hurt. So it's an orthopteroid, which means it is in the same order Orthoptera, which encompasses grasshoppers, crickets, katydids, and in this case, Stenopelmatids. And this is a wingless orthopteroid, so I don't think that any individuals within the Stenopelmatidae actually have wings. They have evolutionary lost them because they really don't need them. When you're living in a habitat like this, you know, like wings don't really become necessary. They actually become a hindrance. But yeah, again, you can see those buff appendages right there that are very useful in digging through this leaf litter. Man, look at those palpi too. And this is a small one. These get way bigger. Like I want to say at least like 10 to 15 times bigger than this. Easily like the size of the palm of my hand and everything. All right, let's put it back. Yeah, Ammopomatus, Stenopelmatidae, Orthoptera. How about that? Let's see what else they got around here. So right here, you see like this kind of white, stringy type of substance and everything. That's the actual mycelium of a fungus right there. So this is the vegetative portion of a fungus that basically does all the metabolism, all the eating and all that stuff. So right now it's spreading its mycelium, basically eating all these dead leaves. And at some point within its life cycle, a mushroom will pop up. And that mushroom is the fruiting body, which spreads the spores in order for it to, you know, proliferate. Oh, and then right next to the fungus, we got this right here. Catch it. All right, in my hand right now we have a crustacean, or at least right now it's currently classified as a crustacean in the order Isopoda. And this is Armadillidium vulgar. But just like many other people, I'm used to calling them roly-polies. So like I said, they are a crustacean. One of the main reasons they're classified as crustaceans because they have two pairs of antennae. However, on this species of isopod, as well as many other isopods, that first set of antennae is no worries, I found it again. So the first set of antennae is very, very reduced, so you can't really see them. But you can see that those other two antennae right there, those are the second antennae. Like many of you probably know already that one of the defensive postures that these things like doing is rolling up in a ball, although it doesn't seem quite willing to do that right now. So with these terrestrial isopods, they kind of share some similar characteristics, I should say, with insects and everything. I mean, obviously they have way more legs than insects. They have about 7 pairs of legs, whereas, you know, insects obviously have 3 pairs of legs. And I mentioned earlier, these guys have 2 prominent antennae, whereas insects only have like 1 pair of antennae. And these guys, along with all isopods, have 3 major body sections. However, they're named differently. At least malacologists have given them different names. So you have the head region, which is also known as the cephalothorax, and you have the middle section with all those legs. That's called the perion. And those legs actually have specific names too. They're called periopods. And then you have the bottom section that pretty much starts right at those little white patch looking things. That's basically the abdomen, but malacologists refer to it as the pleon. And the appendages coming off of that, you can see right there, they look like little flaps. Those are called pleopods. And you see those 2 white patches over there on the abdomen? Those are something called the pseudotracheal system. Now, insects have an actual tracheal system where they're, you know, holes, spiracles that have tubes that lead straight to all the organs. So the organs get essentially direct oxygen from the atmosphere to the organs delivered. With these, since they're crustaceans, and most crustaceans, by far the majority of the diversity within crustaceans are aquatic. So the ancestors of this likely evolved in an aquatic environment, or probably an aquatic marine environment too. And they all have gills. So as an evolutionary adaptation to terrestrial living, they have evolved their exoskeleton to envelop those gills and basically create a pseudotracheal system, somewhat of a pseudotracheal system, or many malacologists like to call them lungs. And they kind of work the same way somewhat as spider book lungs. Remember, like all arachnids, they used to have aquatic ancestors too. So with their book lungs, which are, you know, kind of page shaped like the pages of a book, they were also enveloped by the exoskeleton. And what that does is it keeps the tissues responsible for diffusing gases nice and moist, because oxygen can only diffuse through a moist membrane. So that is basically the adaptation that this species has evolved in order to cope with, you know, living in a terrestrial environment. So they don't let their oxygen diffusing tissues dry out or desiccate. You can see how the anterior pleopods kind of come to like a little taper. That tells me that this is a male. Females of this species don't have that tapering structure. And this is another introduced species out here in California, introduced yet again from Europe. And its native range is actually in the Mediterranean regions of Europe. And just knowing that, it kind of makes sense why these things are so prominent in our backyards in today's ecology out here. Yeah, Armadillidium vulgar, terrestrial isopod, crustacean inhabiting the leaf litter out here in this urban oak forest in charming Ojai, California. Okay, found along with that isopod, we have this right here, and this is Goniodiscus rotundus, a mollusk that also calls this leaf litter ecosystem home. So this is a gastropod species, so it's a snail, and it should be easily seen. I mean, you can see that nice spiral-like shell right there that it has, and it has evolved a lifestyle that is very well suited to living amongst the leaf litter. So it's also another type of detritivore. It'll also feed on the fungus and everything like that, which makes sense. You know, I found that mycelium right there. So that mycelium from whatever fungus that belongs to, that's probably what this thing was eating. But just like many gastropods, these things are hermaphrodites. So they have both male and female sexual reproductive organs. But yeah, Goniodiscus gastropod found within this leaf litter ecosystem. How about that? Learn something. Okay, so just remember, if you ever digging through leaf litter like this, just remember to put the leaves back. You know, you don't want to mess up this little ecosystem too much, you know. Okay, see, we got some vertebrates over here. We got Juco hyemalis, also known as the dark-eyed junco, Passarellidae, family of New World sparrows. And you can see right here, basically exploiting the leaf litter and all the organisms that can be found in the leaf litter. Oh yeah, we got some stuff in here. Let's see if I can get it. Oh, I got it. Oh, okay. There we go. All right. I just fished this little juvenile delinquent out of this stream right here. Okay, so hopefully I can talk about this without getting nipped. Okay, so what we got right here is a crustacean, another crustacean, an aquatic crustacean this time. So it's in the order Decapoda, which is the same order as crabs, lobsters, and right here, crayfish. So this is Procambarus clarkii. better known as the red swamp crayfish. And this is definitely an introduced species here in California. And it most likely was introduced for fishing and for food. California does have its own native crayfish, but since the introduction of this species, our native crayfish populations have unsurprisingly diminished. You can see its nice chelate front leg appendages right there. This one seems to be a juvenile. I saw some large adults in there. Full-grown adults can at least get double the size of this, and those claws can be much larger and much more menacing. This is also the same species of crayfish that you eat at, like, you know, one of those boiling crab Louisiana fish fries or crab boils or something like that. This is probably an apocalypse food. I mean, this can be found in almost every freshwater tributary in California, especially in Southern California. As a matter of fact, I've seen them in, you know, like apartment complex water features. And then if you look up close, you can see the mandibles right there. And these are scavengers. So they'll scavenge around the stream bottom for any type of dead organism to eat. I've seen them eating fruits too that people have tossed in the stream. So they're pretty advantageous on the types of food sources that they can exploit. And then you can see right there, you see those mandibles. Ooh, ooh. All right, that flicking behavior that you just saw, that's called the charadoid escape reflex. And that is a behavior that is observed on many decapods, especially lobsters and shrimp and everything. I don't know if you've ever seen lobsters and shrimp or even played with crayfish before. They just flick their abdomen real fast, and that gives them enough motility to get out of danger. And you can see underneath the telson or the abdomen right there, you can see those pleopods. So I wonder, since they're kind of long, I wonder if this is a female. Usually on decapods that look like this, you can tell whether they're male or female. Yeah, I think this is a female because they're long, and I don't see those extra set of pleopods that are used for mating. So yeah, I have a feeling this is a female. And you can see that all the legs are chelate too. You know, that obviously helps them grip on the substrate, rocks, twigs, and stuff. And then you got the forelimbs, which are heavily chelate because that's the business end. That's what really grabs the food source and rips it apart. You can see those first antennae, they're kind of like stuck together. Those are the ones in the middle. And then those larger second antennae that are sticking out the sides right there, chemoreceptive structures. And then you got that eye right there. I know it looks like a simple eye, but if you was to zoom in real close, you would see that it indeed is a compound eye, and it's a crustacean, and usually crustacean eyes are on stalks. You can see clearly those eyes are on stalks. It's also got that nice rostrum above the eyes right there, a little hardened structure, kind of makes it more hydrodynamic as it's moving through the water, escaping while moving through the water. And then on top right here, we got the cephalothorax, which is kind of a hollowed out structure. Underneath that exoskeleton structure is an array of gills, which is a synapomorphy pretty much amongst all decapods. Protected gills, so you know they don't suffer any abrasion. You can see those lines right there that kind of looks like a Y shape. Those are called ecdisal sutures, and those are basically where the exoskeleton breaks away when it molts, and it'll just squeeze out of that once that breaks away and grow into a larger crayfish. And there you have it, Procambarus clarkii, introduced decapod in the stream systems and lake systems of Southern California. See if I can get a good shot of that charadoid escape reaction. Okay, so right there we have Sitta carolinensis, and I wonder what it's doing right now. I think it's processing food. Yeah, family Sittidae, which is the family of nuthatches, and these usually forage along the trunks of trees. You'll see them like hopping around the trunks of trees. You know, the way their legs and feet are, they're perfectly adapted to hang vertically on the sides of tree trunks. Hang vertically and orient themselves in different ways. Kind of like a woodpecker, but maybe a little bit more acrobatic than them. Yeah, Sittidae, the white-breasted nuthatch. Damn, the birds are being real shy this morning. I need to speak more quietly. But that right there is Aphelicoma californica, foraging amongst these oak trees. Family Corvidae, which is the same family as ravens, crows, and magpies. Formerly known as the western scrub jay, but that species was split into two recently. Those two species being the California scrub jay and was it Woodhouse's scrub jay, I think? All my friends back home like to call these things bluebirds, and I always got to correct them. It don't really matter. It's not like they care anyway. There we have the infamous Quercus niger, common name eastern fox squirrel. And notice I said eastern because it is an introduced species from the East Coast. From what I've read, they were introduced here as pets over 100 years ago and like deliberately released into the wild because their owners thought that they should have a free and happy life like every American. He's being a little bit of a pain in the ass to film, but yeah, ever since they were introduced out here, they've done a pretty decent job displacing our native western gray squirrel, Sciurus griseus. And this squirrel species is ubiquitous in urban areas out here in Southern California. If you're at any public park, more than likely you're gonna see this squirrel, especially parks that are like heavily surrounded in urban areas. Yeah, Sciurus niger. Introduced squirrel species from the East Coast, making a home in California's urban and suburban parks, like right here in charming Ojai, California. Yeah, they're just part of the new ecology. And I'm not necessarily saying that this is like a bad thing that they're here. Yeah, I mean, they have in many cases displaced native gray squirrels, but at the same time, they still fulfill certain niches like being a prey item for many of our native raptors, you know, like hawks. It's just the species that has assumed a certain role, a certain niche in the current ecology around here. And they tend to do better around people. And I wonder if that stems from them being introduced as pets. Like, I wonder if there's major behavioral differences between wild populations in their native range versus these introduced ones out here. All right. I guess that does it for me here, biologizing this urban oak forest out here in charming Ojai, California. I hope you got a kick out of and, you know, possibly enjoyed me talking about just a handful of the organisms that can be found inhabiting this particular space and time. This is just some of them, you know. The representatives that we saw here, you know, some of them were native, and then others, many others, were actually, you know, introduced species that are now calling this current ecology home, essentially. And they're probably here to stay. I really don't think that there's much anybody can do to get rid or exterminate or eradicate or even get this particular habitat even close to its natural condition. I think that is truly impossible. But at the same time, even though we saw many species that are introduced here, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's truly a bad thing. I mean, the initial introduction of those species might have been bad at the time. What it really means is that they are now a part of the ecology and they now have established their own ecological niches within this current ecology. I mean, for example, that vinca, that purple flower we saw earlier, I mean, that plant is kind of, you know, just like taking over many forested understories, especially near stream systems all throughout California. However, it still does have some species to compete with, i.e. the poison oak, cypresses, and other plants. And then there are some other plants that can coexist and grow within those vinca patches. On top of that, those vinca do provide nectar sources for many pollinating insects. So it takes away and provides at the same time is what I'm saying. And then also with the animals, with the Sciurus niger, eastern fox squirrel, you know, it's an introduced species, and when it was introduced at the time, it really did a number on the native gray squirrel populations, pushing them out, especially within city environments. However, they also fulfill the niche of becoming a food source for many of the raptors and coyotes and anything else that would eat, you know, small mammals and stuff. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. I mean, when it comes to this stuff, there really is no such thing as good or bad. It just is. And all you can really do at that point is just make really good educated guesses on what's going to happen next. And to me, that's kind of the fun part, really. But anyway, yeah, I'm getting a little tired. I'm hungry. It's late in the day. My ADD is spazzing out a little bit because there's more people entering this park and, you know, everybody's yapping, building stuff, doing gardening, and it's distracting me. And I'm really hungry. So I'm go to one of these boutique restaurants and pay $50 for a lunch meal. So with all that said, keep your decisions scientific. Stay away from all the gimmicks. I'm Ichabod Slice. Peace up, peace out, learn something.